How accurate is American Psycho? Let's do this. First, let's look at Bateman's obsession with status and appearance. The business card scene isn't just darkly funny. It's a perfect snapshot of how corporate psychopaths operate. In real corporate America, especially in high-finance environments like Wall Street, this obsession with minute details of status is very real. Studies have shown that corporate psychopaths are often extremely focused on appearances and status symbols. A 2016 study found that about 4 to 8% of business leaders displayed psychopathic traits, significantly higher than the 1% in the general population. The movie nails Bateman's ability to maintain a perfect facade while being completely empty inside. His morning routine, the designer clothes, the expensive restaurants, it's all part of a carefully constructed image. Real corporate psychopaths often exhibit this same kind of meticulous attention to their external presentation. They're masters at creating a persona that fits perfectly into corporate culture while hiding their true nature. The film's depiction of Bateman's complete lack of empathy, masked by rehearsed emotions, is eerily accurate. Notice how he can switch from rage to charm in an instant, like when he's ranting about Genesis to his girlfriend, and then smoothly greeting acquaintances at a restaurant. This mirrors real corporate psychopaths who are often described as chameleons, able to adjust their personality to manipulate different people. Another aspect the movie gets right is Bateman's intense competitiveness and need to win at everything, even the most trivial things. Whether it's getting reservations at Dorsha or having the best business card, he's pathologically driven to come out on top. This tracks with real corporate psychopaths who often display extreme competitiveness and a win-at-all-costs mentality. A 2010 study found that successful corporate psychopaths were more likely to engage in unethical decision-making to achieve their goals. The film also captures the strange mix of grandiosity and insecurity that often characterizes corporate psychopaths. Bateman is simultaneously supremely arrogant and deeply insecure, constantly seeking validation while believing he's superior to everyone. This paradoxical state is common among real corporate psychopaths, who often display what psychologists call successful psychopathy. The ability to channel psychopathic traits into career success while being plagued by internal insecurities. The way Bateman sees people as objects or tools is another accurate portrayal. His colleagues aren't people to him. They're obstacles, resources, or competition. This objectification is a hallmark of corporate psychopathy. Real corporate psychopaths often view others solely in terms of their usefulness or as obstacles to be overcome. His ability to fly under the radar is also spot on. Despite his extreme behavior, most people around Bateman either don't notice or don't care. This reflects the reality that many corporate psychopaths are able to operate quite successfully within corporate structures. Their behavior might be seen as intense or aggressive, but it's often written off as what it takes to succeed. One thing the film really nails is the concept of mask wearing. Bateman's constant refrain of, "I have to return some videotapes," or his rehearsed speech about caring about world issues shows how corporate psychopaths use social scripts to appear normal. Real corporate psychopaths often have a collection of practiced responses and behaviors they use to blend in. Now, is the morning routine really a holy grail of youth? The ice pack on the face first thing in the morning isn't actually a bad start. Cold therapy can help reduce puffiness and inflammation, and it can stimulate blood circulation. Modern skincare experts do recommend cold treatments, though nowadays you're more likely to see jade rollers or cryo tools rather than straight-up ice packs. The morning puffiness Bateman mentions is a real thing. During sleep, fluid can accumulate in the face, especially if you sleep face down. His deep pore cleanser lotion is where things get interesting. Bateman specifies that it's alcohol-free, which is actually pretty smart for the 80s when alcohol-based products were common. Modern dermatologists generally agree that alcohol-free cleansers are better for your skin, as they don't disrupt the skin barrier or cause unnecessary drying. The exfoliating gel scrub step is something modern skincare would approach differently. While physical exfoliation was all the rage in the 80s, today's experts generally prefer chemical exfoliants like AHAs or BHAs for gentler, more effective exfoliation. Daily scrubbing, as Bateman does, would likely be considered too harsh by current standards. His herb mint facial mask is actually not a bad idea, though doing it daily might be overkill. Clay or mint masks can help absorb excess oil and give a refreshing feeling, but modern skincare would probably recommend using them 2 to 3 times a week rather than every day. The final moisturizer with little or no alcohol is another point in Bateman's favor. He's also onto something with his eye cream to prevent aging. The eye area does need special attention, as the skin there is thinner and more prone to showing signs of aging. However, modern formulations would likely include specific active ingredients like peptides or caffeine, rather than just being a protective cream. One thing Bateman gets right is the importance of aftershave lotion with little or no alcohol. Alcohol-based aftershaves can be incredibly drying and irritating to freshly shaved skin. Today's post-shave products often focus on soothing and hydrating rather than the traditional alcohol-heavy formulas. His use of a final moisturizer with SPF is surprisingly forward-thinking for the 80s. Sun protection is now considered one of the most crucial steps in any skincare routine, though modern sunscreens are far more sophisticated than what was available when American Psycho was set. What's missing from Bateman's routine by today's standards? He doesn't mention any antioxidants like vitamin C, which are now considered key for morning skincare. He's also not using any targeted treatments like peptides or niacinamide, which are common in modern routines. The sequence of his routine is actually not bad, going from cleansing to treatments to moisturizing. However, modern skincare would probably streamline it a bit. Context is important here. This routine is very much a product of its time. The late 80s were all about excess, including in skincare. Modern routines tend to be more focused on efficacy rather than luxury for luxury's sake. Bateman's routine reflects the more is more attitude of the era. Here's a wild fact. Some high-end skincare routines in the 80s could cost upwards of $1,000 in today's money. Bateman's routine, with all its branded products, would have been seriously expensive, fitting his character's materialistic nature. From a psychological perspective, the intense focus on his skincare routine reflects Bateman's obsession with appearances and his attempt to create a perfect exterior to mask his internal emptiness. Now, is Bateman rich? First up, that killer apartment on the Upper West Side. In the movie, Bateman's living in American Gardens building on West 81st Street, prime real estate even back then. A high-end apartment in that area during the late 80s would have run you anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, which adjusting for inflation is like $1.2 to $2.4 million today. Was this doable for a young VP? Actually, yeah. Investment banking was absolutely booming in the 80s, and vice presidents at top firms like Pierce & Pierce, based on real-life Merrill Lynch, could pull in $200,000 to $400,000 annually between salary and bonus. Real estate was also way more attainable in the 80s compared to now, even in Manhattan. Now, about that VP title. Bateman being a VP at 27 is totally legit. In investment banking, the career track was, and still is, pretty standardized. You start as an analyst out of college, then associate after MBA, hitting VP around 26 to 28 if you're on the fast track. The 80s were the era of the young hotshot banker, so his position checks out. Let's check out his ride situation. Bateman rocks a black 1979 Chrysler LeBaron, which was actually a pretty modest choice. These went for around $6,000 to $10,000 used in the late 80s. However, the movie doesn't show his supposed collection, including a Lamborghini Countach, which would have been around $100,000 back then. For a guy making his kind of money, this car collection was definitely achievable, especially since exotic cars were relatively cheaper in the 80s compared to modern prices. His overall money game, the designer suits, high-end restaurants like Dorsia, the endless stuff, it all adds up. But remember, this was the era of excess. Junior bankers were making bank and spending it as fast as they could earn it. A typical night out could easily hit $1,000 between fancy dinners, clubs, and supplies. Bateman's shown spending habits, while extreme, aren't that far off from real 80s Wall Street culture. The scene where they compare cards is hilarious, but also pretty accurate. In the status-obsessed world of 80s banking, every detail mattered. Those cards probably cost a few $100 each, nothing for guys dropping thousands on dinner and drugs. The one thing the movie gets weirdly right is the obsession with appearances and status symbols. The tanning beds, expensive skincare routines, designer everything. It was all about showing off success. These guys were making serious money in their 20s and had to show it. Bateman's morning routine, while psychotic, reflects the real pressure to maintain a certain image. Looking at the numbers, most of Bateman's lifestyle is actually pretty spot on for a successful young banker in 1980s New York. The apartment, the cars, the expensive habits, it all tracks with the insane money that was flowing through Wall Street at the time. While the character is obviously a satirical exaggeration, his spending power isn't as unrealistic as you might think. The 80s were just built different, especially if you were crushing it on Wall Street. Now let's go deeper in this corporate culture. The movie nails the obsession with appearance. Those Valentino suits, Oliver Peoples glasses, and the constant comparison of styles weren't just movie magic. Real 80s bankers were absolutely fixated on designer labels. There was an unofficial uniform, double-breasted suits, preferably from Brooks Brothers or Paul Stewart, suspenders, and Hermes ties. The movie actually tones it down. In reality, these guys were even more label-obsessed. They'd literally check each other's suit labels when hanging up their jackets. The slicked-back hair was real too. Every banker looked like he'd just stepped out of a Patrick Nagel painting. Now, the restaurant scene? Spot on. Getting reservations at top spots like Dorsia, based on real places like Odeon and 21 Club, was a blood sport. Having the right table at the right restaurant was everything. These guys would drop thousands on dinner without blinking, and the cocaine use was rampant. Bathroom stalls in upscale restaurants were basically Wall Street's second office. The movie actually underplays how much drugs were part of the culture. It was just assumed everyone was doing coke. What about the working culture? The movie shows a lot of guys hanging around, not doing much work. Surprisingly accurate for VP level and up. Junior analysts were grinding away, but once you hit VP, a lot of the job was relationship management, long lunches, longer nights out, and endless networking. The movie doesn't show much actual banking work, which is pretty true to life for Bateman's level. The rivalry and backstabbing? If anything, the reality was worse. These guys would sabotage deals, steal clients, and spread rumors to destroy careers. The pressure to outperform was insane. Your bonus depended not just on your performance, but on being perceived as better than your peers. This created a culture of constant one-upmanship and the conformity. Everyone trying to look the same, eat at the same restaurants, live in the same buildings. It was about belonging to an elite club while simultaneously trying to stand out within it. The scene where they can't tell each other apart isn't just comedy. It's commentary on how these guys had essentially become interchangeable parts in the money-making machine. What about the music obsession? This is where the movie takes some creative license. While guys definitely talked about music, those long monologues about Huey Lewis and Phil Collins are more of a metaphor for how these bankers would become instant experts in whatever was trendy. One week it'd be wine, the next week cigars, then suddenly everyone's an art collector. The violence in American Psycho is obviously satirical, but it represents something real. The complete disconnection from normal human empathy and emotions that this lifestyle created. These guys weren't actual killers, but the job did require a certain kind of psychological violence, being able to fire hundreds of people, destroy companies, and ruin lives, all while going out for drinks afterward. One underplayed aspect: the sexism. The movie shows it, but the reality was even worse. Women in banking were rarely seen as equals. The phrase sexual harassment barely existed. The testosterone-fueled atmosphere made Wolf of Wall Street look tame. Here's what's crazy. A lot of this culture still exists today, just in a more subtle form. I'm not talking random stuff, I got my facts check. First, let's talk numbers. The 1980s saw an unprecedented boom in consumer spending. Between 1980 and 1989, personal consumption expenditures in the US increased by 114%, from $1.7 trillion to $3.7 trillion. The movies weren't exaggerating. People really were spending like crazy. Credit card debt tripled during this period, from $50 billion in 1980 to $150 billion by 1989. The American Express card Patrick Bateman flashes wasn't just a status symbol, it was a weapon of mass consumption. What drove this spending spree? Supply-side economics, baby. The Reagan administration's policies led to significant tax cuts, particularly for high earners. The top marginal tax rate dropped from 70% in 1980 to 28% by 1988. This created a new class of young, wealthy professionals, exactly the type we see in American Psycho. A study by the Economic Policy Institute found that the income of the top 1% grew by 87% during the 1980s, while the bottom 90% only saw an increase of 1.4%. The films nail the obsession with brands and status symbols. Luxury goods sales exploded in the 80s. Gucci's sales increased by 200% between 1979 and 1984. The scenes showing characters obsessing over designer labels? Completely accurate. Market research from the era shows a significant shift in consumer behavior, with brand awareness becoming a primary factor in purchasing decisions. A 1985 Yankelovich study found that 67% of Americans agreed that their possessions were a reflection of how well they were doing in life, up from 42% in 1975. Real estate in movies like American Psycho is portrayed as a status game, and the data backs this up. In Manhattan, the average price of a condo increased by 150% during the 1980s. The term yuppie, young urban professional, was coined during this era, and these young professionals were indeed snapping up luxury apartments. Census data shows that homeownership among 25 to 34-year-olds actually increased during the 80s, contrary to the trend in previous decades. Now, what about the workplace materialism? The movies show bankers competing over everything from business cards to restaurant reservations. This tracks with sociological studies from the era. A 1987 study in the Journal of Consumer Research found that workplace status competition had intensified, with personal possessions increasingly being used as markers of professional success. The average price of a business suit doubled between 1980 and 1989, reflecting this arms race of appearance. One thing the films get particularly right is the generational shift in attitudes toward wealth. The University of Michigan's Survey of Consumer Attitudes found that in 1980, 45% of respondents under 30 agreed with the statement, "Financial success is very important." By 1989, this had jumped to 78%. The young character's obsession with status and wealth wasn't just theatrical, it reflected a real cultural shift. Let's talk tech, which the movies sometimes underplay. The 80s saw the birth of the gadget culture we know today. Sales of personal computers grew from 724,000 units in 1980 to 20 million by 1989. The Sharper Image, a store devoted to high-end gadgets, saw its sales increase by 3,000% during the decade. While American Psycho shows Bateman's Walkman, it misses the broader tech materialism of the era. The culture of conspicuous consumption wasn't just about buying stuff. It was about being seen buying stuff. Department store sales increased by 90% during the 1980s, with luxury retailers leading the charge. Neiman Marcus saw its sales triple between 1980 and 1989. The scene in American Psycho where Bateman shops at multiple high-end stores. That was a typical Saturday for many young professionals. What's fascinating is the regional aspect of 80s materialism. While movies focus on New York, data shows the phenomenon was nationwide. Los Angeles saw a 180% increase in luxury car sales during the decade. In Houston, despite the oil bust mid-decade, sales of luxury goods only dipped briefly before resuming their climb. Looking at the actual economic data, we can say that if anything, many movies underplayed the materialism of the era. The real numbers are often more extreme than what we see on screen. It wasn't a few Wall Street bankers. It was a nationwide shift in values and spending habits that reshaped American culture. Drop a comment if you lived through the 80s. Did it feel as materialistic as the data suggests? Subscribe to the channel, and you can give me suggestions for next video idea. See ya.